Hey there, folks. How you doing? Thanks for joining me on kind of short notice tonight for this uh, special live stream. Usually you guys know me for talking about certain types of topics. We go into the science of paranormal phenomena, dark matter, Bigfoot, cryptids, all sorts of fun topics, crop circles. And tonight I wanted to talk about something which is very important that more has to do with current uh, news, legal events, health, and so forth, because I just found out about this afternoon. And what we're talking about uh, is artificial water fluoridation. And we had a major breakthrough uh, about a week ago where Judge Chen in this Northern California District Court ruled in the favor of plaintiffs, which were citizen groups just coming together. It's the first time in history that a citizen groups came together to challenge the EPA. And Judge Chen ruled in favor of uh, these plaintiffs who were arguing that there's potential toxic effects of artificial water fluoridation. So, before we go any further, let's see. Thanks for being here, Rod and Sebastian. Nice to see you again. Thanks for joining me tonight. So, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the issue of artificial water fluoridation, something I've been involved with uh, opposing mandatory fluoridation of water, municipal water supplies in the United States and around the world. It's actually not around the world. It's just basically in the Five Eyes countries. The UK does it a little bit. Australia and New Zealand are big into it. Somewhat in Canada. I think um, Northern Ireland, associated with the UK. Most of the world doesn't do fluoridation. The US does, but none of the EU countries uh, have water fluoridation. And this is so why does this matter? I mean, for those of you who are used to hearing different videos on my channel, and by the way, I'm going to have just before we go on with fluoride, just to tell you what's coming up, I've got my presentation about the Aronhoff Bohm effect and remote viewing that I presented in video form to Society for Scientific Exploration last weekend. And since I made the video, I uploaded it. So I'll have that available sometime tomorrow about what may explain remote viewing and this effect, the Aronhoff Bohm effect, which has been known about since the 50s and then experimentally verified in the 80s. It's a distant, non local communication, non electromagnetic type of interaction that uses something called vector potential. And I talk about that in this presentation as one of the clues to how remote viewing, resonant viewing, as I call it, as you know, may work. Um, so I'll have that going on tomorrow. I also attended this event, Olympic Strange Days on the Olympic Peninsula last week, and I'll have something about that as well. So the typical normal strange topics, we'll have some videos about that. But here's the thing about fluoride. I've been involved with this since 2005 as a Colorado resident. There was this citizens initiative in 2005 in Boulder, and we got enough signatures to put it on the ballot. And the reason why would you want to put this on the ballot? Well, let me just back up here for a second. I think this topic has a lot to do with UFO disclosure, and you can probably imagine why. You can go on for decades and decades thinking that things will never change, right? You could feel that about UFO disclosure, fluoride, and you could just feel like no matter what you do, the powers that be are going to push back all the bureaucracies that surround us in modern societies, that they're just too they have too much inertia, and you just can't change what they're doing. They're just too heavily funded. They're going to do what they want. And you can be kind of despondent, right? After a while, you could be feeling that there's nothing you can really do to change the situation. And I know a lot of us felt that way about, you know, UFO disclosure, that entire area of special access programs, crash recoveries, and all of this, that we have witnesses who've come forward and told us these things exist, yet we can't find anything out about it. Even the people that have come forward recently, Lou Elizondo, for example, in his book Imminent, doesn't really mention very much in specifics. He said in an interview that he could go to jail if he talks about crash retrievals, UFO crash retrievals. So you could feel, based on what some of these people have said, Christopher Mellon, Dave Grush, others, that not, it's just too, you're fighting an opponent that's just too strong that you can't make any difference. And you go along in your life like a lot of us have, right? And you're thinking, look, decades have gone by. I got involved in this issue personally in the 90s. That's a long time ago, 30 years ago, and almost. And has it really changed that much? Well, I think we've made some progress. But here's why this matters, this Florida, because this is a big change. I got involved with this in 2005. Artificial water fluoridation has been going on, if I'm not mistaken, since I believe the early 50s, maybe before that. Um, there's an excellent book about water fluoridation called The Fluoride Deception. Um, I forget the author, Christopher Bryant, something like that. I have a lot of books here, and I couldn't find it at the last minute. But there's a long history to adding fluoride to the water in the U.S., and a lot of it has to do with this World War II uh, and Cold War mentality afterwards, that we needed to have a lot of thermonuclear weapons around, and you need fluoride as a solvent to make thermonuclear weapons. And there was this fear, according to the author of The Fluoride Deception. Um, you're welcome to look it up right now and put it in the comments who the author was. It's just a very good history of the whole program. Is they needed to have a PR effort to make fluoride, which was a known carcinogen, very acidic. It's one of the most toxic substances on planet Earth in its raw form because it's so electronegative. It just goes in and destroys other materials and dissolves them, right? So, according to, okay, who is it? Who is, according to the author of Fluoride Deception, they needed to make fluoride have a PR makeover. And by adding it to water, you could say, look, it's safe, it's good for your teeth. You don't need to be afraid of fluoride processing and how we're using it. And they felt it would increase the supply of fluoride for nuclear weapons production. So again, just like the UFO issue, this goes back to the Cold War and steps that were taken during the Cold War to increase the amount of secrecy and hide certain subjects from the public in the name of national security. At least that's how it was justified back then, right? So fluoride is just, it's a very long history, at least, I mean, in the last century, previous century, of attempts to show that there was some usefulness for this product, which is also a waste product of the fertilizer industry. Uh, you end up getting a lot of fluoride on the smokestacks of phosphorus fertilizer plants. And it's so toxic, you're not allowed to dispose of it anywhere or in an ordinary way. You can't put it in water. You can't just ship it around because it's highly toxic. So they had to find something. And this is another idea of why we have this water fluoridation. is you had to find something to do with this waste product from fertilizer plants, and there was a lot of it around in certain areas, and they felt like, well, we can sell it to municipalities as a water additive since it has some teeth hardening effects, or at least that's what it was argued. Now, from what I know, you might have heard that there's some benefits to having water fluoridation. And from all the research I've been able to read, and I take these subjects seriously, I'm open minded to the evidence, but it seems that a lifetime of drinking fluoridated water at 1 part per million, as was done until about 15 years ago, when I think it was CDC lowered the recommended dose to zero point 0.7 parts per million. If you drink that over a lifetime, it'll prevent 1/3 of one cavity in your whole life. So it's a pretty small effect. One side of one tooth from a cavity, just a part of that. Not like it'll prevent tons of cavities, just a little cavity prevention over your whole life. Of course, there's a lot of other dangers associated with uh, fluoride, and even at low doses. And that's what this trial was about. So, in the history of fluoride, you had a lot of bureaucracies get behind water fluoridation, and these trade organizations like the ADA, American Dental Association. And, for these bureaucracies like CDC and National Institutes of Health, but it's mainly the CDC and the Oral Health Division. And by the way, I learned this from uh, watch, this website, FloridaAlert.org. Paul Connett, who's a chemist who got involved with this, had a lot of public information. He came out to Boulder and he had a lot of videos about this. So this is where I learned about a lot of the realities of artificial water fluoridation. And there's always been a lot of negative effects of water fluoridation. And I'm not saying this like to give health advice or anything. I'm just repeating what's in the scientific literature. It can cause osteoporosis, brittle bones, hardening of pineal gland, um, and it can be hard on people with weaker kidneys. There are cases of animals like horses in Colorado Springs dying from drinking too much fluoridated water when they were really thirsty when it was hot. And just a whole litany of negative effects of just the fluoride ion being present in the water. Since it's so electronegative, it just starts binding to cells in your body, and it can destroy DNA. And that's where we were with this current trial that started in 2020. Now, again, my experience was in Boulder, Colorado with the Citizens Initiative. And some of us got together. I knew an environmental attorney there in Boulder, and he had done this research on water fluoridation and some of the negative effects um, of just drinking a lot of uh, fluoridated water uh, from controlled studies. And by the way, the proponents of water fluoridation have never presented very good evidence that it was effective or safe. The CDC always said this is one of the top 10 health achievements of the 20th century, but that's just PR from federal bureaucracy. It's not really true. Uh, the uh, the health effects are pretty long, and the benefits. As speaking as a former statistics teacher, the studies are always really weak, and they're confounded by uh, third variables, uh, other variables. It mainly correlated the benefits of fluoride with your socioeconomic ranking of your neighborhood, just because wealthier neighborhoods can afford water fluoridation, and they also can afford better dental care. And uh, the main way to prevent dental problems, tooth decay, and so forth, is just to have dental care and to eat less sugar and so forth and brush your teeth. Kind of basic stuff. But there was never really good evidence. The studies were always very weak that there was any sort of dental benefit from fluoride, and I'm talking in terms of statistical significance and the controls, and just looking at a lot of the studies. There were some in the 50s, but it was always very questionable, and the studies as a whole were weak. There was, again, some suggesting it had a tooth hardening effect, but it's not strong evidence. It's not evidence you can demonstrate with a controlled study, and there were no controlled studies. The basic gold standard of modern science, and I'm talking as someone that reads Science magazine every single week to look for articles about the topics we usually talk about here. Oh, sorry, it's not focusing well because we have the blur on. But usually you have these randomized controlled studies where you randomize who's in your study, and you have these controls like a group that has the treatment and a group that's just the placebo group or doesn't have the treatment. You didn't have those with fluoride. They were just comparing neighborhoods, which is always very questionable because there are these socioeconomic uh, contrast between neighborhoods. And so we didn't have a lot of good evidence. Yeah, Brooke, it was bad science. It was really bad science. It was industry funded science. And doesn't mean that industry funded science is always bad, Brooke, but it can be. And in this case, it was really bad. Uh, there is this case in the fluoride deception of they start out with Phyllis Mullinex. This is a woman that was hired to look into the effects of fluoride. I forget at which university she was working for or which agency. But what she ended up finding was that the rats that had more fluoride in their water had developed ADHD. And she did this, uh, Mullinex did this by using this stop motion film to look at motions of rats. And she was able to show that the rats that have fluoride get ADHD. Do you know people around you that have ADHD? That's one of the side effects of fluoride. Well, Mullinex went on not realizing what toes she was stepping on. She got fired and blacklisted from a variety of agencies and industries because she found that there was a negative effect of fluoride. They wanted her to find out um, that there was no effect, but she found a negative effect. And then Harold Hodge, who was one of the proponents of fluoride, I think back in the 50s. And I have to say, I'm doing this kind of live stream at the spur of the moment, so I haven't done a ton of refreshing the exact names and dates. But there was a character named Harold Hodge who, before he got involved in promoting fluoride, had been involved in nuclear testing and uh, secretive testing of nuclear waste products on human beings without their knowledge, something like that. And one of the things I studied in graduate school was the effect of this Hanford reactor over in Richland, Washington, where they did these downwind experiments. They released these radioactive blooms to see what the effect would be on the population in the area called the Palouse through eastern Washington up into northern Idaho, and they found there was just a wave of thyroid cancers after they released these radioactive blooms. So we know that and they didn't tell people that they were doing this. So we know that the government sometimes can experiment on its own people without informing them, which, not only is that illegal, it's also highly unethical to take the people that are paying your salaries and to deliberately expose them to harmful chemicals and nuclear radioactive products, right? So the government has had a history of doing this in the past, and they did this with fluoride too. There was this study of beagles exposed to fluoride gases, and they developed these really bad lung problems. But the company, I forget which company, did these beagle studies, hid them away during these hearings and so forth, and attempts to find out the effects of fluoride. In other words, they did their own study. And oh, hi, Andy. Thanks for joining us tonight. They did these studies on the beagles. Again, it's in the book, The Fluoride Deception. Uh, since no one has looked it up yet, I'm really curious. I have to find out. I just want to say who the author is because it's so good. It'll Christopher Bryan did. This is what we thought. Okay. So, so Christopher Bryant, Florida Deception. They did these Beagle studies, then they hid them away in their file drawer. It's called the file drawer effect, which is when you get results that don't agree with what you want, you put it away in your file drawer and you don't show anybody else. Well, when industry does that, and Science Magazine has had these discussions whether that should even be legal. When a study is carried out and there's a result, should that be public knowledge, or does the industry, even if they paid for it, get to hide it if it doesn't favor their particular interests? Well, that's what we had happen with fluoride. And there have been battles going on with it for decades and decades. And the proponents have always accused the people who reject water fluoridation of being, scientific crackpots and promoting junk science. I mean, they used these really negative tactics that came out of Madison Avenue advertising agencies. They used these Madison Avenue uh, ad agencies to have these vast PR campaigns um, to try to get the public to believe that it was safe. And if there's a parallel here, before we get to this ruling, this federal ruling, which is so outstanding, it's to leaded gasoline. The reason you had leaded gasoline is because it was a very profitable thing to put lead in gas because you could sell another waste product and sell it to the petroleum industry. And there was a huge resistance from the petroleum industry and the lead manufacturers of lead to ban leaded gasoline, even after it was shown to lower IQs of inner city children who were exposed to the most auto pollution. And places like New York City in the 30s attempted to ban leaded gasoline because even back then they knew it wasn't good for kids' brains. And the industry responded by filing lawsuits against the cities that wanted to ban leaded gasoline, right? And they said it was anti-competition, anti-competitive, anti-trade. We can't sell our leaded gasoline. And they succeeded. They won for decades. When was leaded gasoline finally banned, folks? Was it the 70s, if I'm not mistaken? When I was a kid, I remember leaded gasoline being phased out. It can take decades to phase these lethal chemicals out of our environment because these industrial groups have so much money and uh, so much influence, and they buy off Congress. In this case, they bought off the Secretary of Commerce, who sided with the gasoline industry. Hi, Renee. Thanks for joining us tonight. Who sided with the gasoline industry to prevent leaded gasoline from being, banned from cities where it was demonstrated to lower the IQ. Even nowadays, if you try to sell a home or something, you have to do this lead disclosure. Well, a lot of us feel like the fluoride issue is very similar to lead, is that you had a lot of industrial interest behind selling a waste product from the fertilizer industry. And the fluoride that's added to US water now is imported from China. We're importing this dangerous waste product from China and putting it in the water. So when I got involved in 2005 in this issue, and you're welcome to add any points you want. Thanks for being here. Feel free to type any comments in. Uh, when I got involved in 2005, it was a citizens initiative. We got 5,000 signatures standing in front of Safeway and some food stores over the years. Over, I think it was 6 months, we had to get 5,000 signatures to put it on the ballot. And our initiative was not to ban fluoride, since we thought that might not pass. We wanted to maybe have a cleaner fluoride product. Part of the problem is when you add something to your drinking water that comes from the inside of smokestacks of fertilizer plants, it has lead, it has cadmium, and it has arsenic and other heavy metals. Why are heavy metals dangerous for you? Because they're big molecules and they don't easily pass through your uh, your body. They get stuck in there because the capillaries and so forth are not big enough to allow the heavy metals to get processed by your body. So they kind of build up in your body, and they're toxic, and they're not eliminated by your body like other toxic chemicals are by your liver and your kidneys, right? So we wanted to argue that maybe this initiative this is what we got on the ballot, by the way, um, was just to use a cleaner, food safe fluoride, if there is such a thing. Because in Japan, they do use a food safe fluoride product. I think it's in toothpaste or something like this. And this is another aspect of the fluoride issue, folks, is you can get all the fluoride you want if you really think that fluoride is good for your teeth. And there is evidence that if you put it on the teeth directly, not drink it, which goes into every cell in your body, just put it right on the teeth with dental rinses or fluoride toothpaste. There is evidence that it's effective topically. Just make sure you don't swallow it. You've seen the labels on the side of fluoridated toothpaste. It says if more than amount used for brushing is consumed, a normal brushing, like a pea-sized amount, call your local poison center. It tells you something right there. But no, there is evidence that dental rinses with fluoride, it's an antibacterial. So there is evidence that topically it's useful. And the argument had always been if the health agencies of the US feel that fluoride has a positive effect on your dental health, and honestly, dental health is correlated with the rest of your health very highly. So if your mouth is healthy, it's a good indication that the rest of your body is healthy. Um, so, so dental health is important, no doubt about it. And if you feel that you can rinse your mouth well after using fluoridated toothpaste, I think the evidence is that it works topically. There's just no evidence that it works from drinking it because it's going into your bones. Another aspect of drinking fluoridated water is fluorosis, those little white specks that you have on your teeth. I have a few. When I was born in New York City in 1963, um, uh, they they hadn't started water fluoridation until 65 in New York City. So I had 2 years as an infant before the fluoride set in, luckily. Um, but it causes this dental fluorosis on your teeth, which is a weakening of the teeth. It's a molecular change in the tooth composition where fluoride substitutes for calcium, I believe, in the apatite. The apatite is that mineral on the surface of your teeth. It's one of the hardest things on the planet. Isn't nature incredible that it puts one of the hardest things that are known right on the surface of your teeth, so-called apatite, very, very hard mineral. Um, and the fluoride ion substitutes for some of the calcium. And if it does that too much, so the thing about fluoride is it's very hard, but it's very brittle. And that's why there's a correlation between osteoporosis and fluoride. And as you know, in the United States, if you're from here in the United States, there's an issue with elderly people having broken hip fractures and stuff. You know about this, right? And a lot of us think that could have something to do with the water fluoridation, since the countries that have uh, water fluoridation seem to have a higher level of osteoporosis. So you have to ask yourself, is this a fair deal to avoid one third of one cavity over your life in exchange for getting osteoporosis when you get older? Because here's what I understand about the effect of the fluoride is half of it is excreted by your kidneys, but the other half is put into your bones. The body wants to get rid of it, so it puts it into your bones. It overconcentrates, and it makes the bones harder but more brittle, so they're more likely to fracture. So the initiative we had in Boulder was let's just suggest a cleaner product. Now it's much more expensive, and I guess what we believed is they wouldn't go for that, even if they wouldn't be able to afford it, so they'd have to stop fluoridating. So it was sort of a strategy we were using, but they could have used a cleaner fluoride product without the heavy metals. We ended up losing so we walked around, we campaigned and got signatures and had people sign ballots and so forth, and we did public education. Uh, thanks, Andy. Maybe, yeah, no, I think I was lucky. I had 2 years without fluoridation, first 2 years of my life, plus in utero. We'll talk about that in a second with the judge's ruling. So, we lost by 700 votes out of 100,000 votes cast. That's less than 1%. What we realized when we looked at the demographics is we had 80% of the younger people's votes. And there's a university in Boulder, just up the hill, the University of Colorado. We should have spent our time campaigning in the younger neighborhoods and busing those people to the poll. We only needed 700 more people to vote on our side out of 100,000 votes. It got closer and closer as the absentee ballots came in, but we just lost by less than 1%. And we're not politicians. We didn't understand about selectively, people with more political experience. You campaign with the people that are more likely to vote your direction. You don't try to change the minds of older people. And it was pretty much based on demographics. The older people were, the more they decided with their dentist. We don't know why dentists are always so pro fluoridation. It just may be a cheap way to make themselves look good, another PR thing. Or maybe they know that it makes your teeth more brittle in the long run and it gives them more employment. I'm not sure, actually. I mean, honestly, folks, a lot of this, why there is such a push for water fluoridation in the US and maybe Australia and New Zealand, that's it. And the rest of the world doesn't do it because, like in the EU and Sweden, they did studies, Germany, they said it's carcinogenic, it has negative health effects. We don't want to put that in water. And they actually fluoridate their salt, I think, a little bit, but that's your choice how much to sprinkle on salt and so forth. And that's really what this comes down to, right? Isn't it just a matter of choice? If you think fluoride is helpful to you and you know your kidneys are in good shape, you can apply it in toothpaste and there'll be a beneficial effect to reduce cavities, no doubt about it. If you can really rinse it out, it's really a question: should you medicate the water? Our opponents in Boulder said, "Well, it's not really a medication and so forth," but it is because you're treating disease, oral tooth decay, and you're adding something to the water to treat that. So it's like forcibly medicating the water, which I think it's just highly questionable and unethical to make people consume a chemical without their choice. We all have to drink water every day, and buying bottled water, even filtered water, can be expensive. Changing filters, that creates more pollution with the filters getting tossed out and everything. Plastic water bottles and so forth, which release of plastic nanoparticles uh, all over the place. I mean, it creates more plastic pollution. So we had a very good point. And in the time period between now and last week, it didn't seem like there was a lot of progress. Yes, the CDC did say we've decided there's too much dental fluorosis amongst teenagers, so the uh, they reduced the recommended dose to zero point 0.7 parts per million. So that's really the only thing that happened. And it was up to each municipality to vote and decide if they wanted to fluoridate or not. So what happened last week is there was this trial that started in 2020. I've been listening to it since it was on Zoom. It started in 2020 and then there was COVID. They put it on Zoom and you could listen to it. And I followed a lot of it and heard the testimony. And I'll just show you um, uh, just one little screenshot from fluoridealert.org. This is the website you can go to learn more about this. It's just a great website, great bunch of folks. Paul and Michael Connett was the attorney, Paul's son, who took on the EPA here. I mean, I think this is just very exciting because it shows the truth can win out, scientific evidence can win out. And they went after EPA's witnesses. Um, which you can see here. If you go to fluoridealert.org, you will see this sort of information. But there were a lot of these witnesses, and um, they just took on all these witnesses from the EPA. They showed that some of them were just paid like a lot of money. They didn't like that, but judge said, "I want to hear how much you're being paid." Some of them were being paid like $100,000 to testify from the EPA of your tax money to uh, there was this company that just has experts that work for the chemical industry. I forget their name at the moment. And EPA hired them. They're just hired guns in white coats that are going to say whatever you want them to say in response to money. They're shills. Okay. And the basic argument, and this is what this is about tonight, and I'm not going to keep you here too long, but this is what the argument was: it's neurotoxic. The argument was, and this is the whole argument from the plaintiffs, you can see it here. Fluoride causes neurotoxic harm at relatively low levels. And they had over, I think, somewhere around 200 studies showing that it's a linear effect. The more fluoride in the water, the more you get lowering of IQ. And I think you'd all agree that's pretty serious side effect for having one third less cavity over your entire life with have a lower IQ. And it's something like for every 1 part per million, there's a loss of like 0.28 IQ or something like this, or every 0.28 increase in fluoride parts per million, there's a lowering of 1% of IQ. It's pretty serious. You can quantify how much economic damage is done from lower IQs. We can't afford to have people have lower IQs, right? I think we can all agree about that. Yes, Andy, plastics need to be regulated well. One thing about I was looking at plastic tea bags, from those higher end teas that are in plastic bags. I was wondering, is this safe? I looked it up. There's 11 billion particles per tea bag released into your water. Billion tiny little nanoparticles every time you have tea. And they measured the effect in some small animals and things, I think fleas or something. They found a negative effect of this plastic. So think about that. But in any case, this was about neurotoxicity. And EPA tried to poke holes in all of these studies. The plaintiffs were arguing under TSCA, the Toxic Control Substances Act, that fluoride is a toxin and has to be regulated like a toxin, like any other toxin, like DDT or any lead, like lead. They were saying it has to be regulated like lead. Anytime you buy a product, right? If there's lead exposure, it says you could be exposed to lead. You get the idea. That's what this was about. And this trial, it went on for years. And I knew it was going to, the outcome, I just felt it was going to be good because Judge Chen really listened and he wanted to hear all the evidence. And he did not want the trial to be done before all the evidence was in. While the trial was going on, there was a National Toxicology Program report that was in the works. And Judge Chen said, why don't we wait until this NTP report comes out since it has the latest information on uh, neurotoxic effects of fluoride? And the report, even the early part of the report, said it's neurotoxic. And EPA said, well, that's just an early report. That's not the final conclusion. Maybe NTP is going to, and this is a government program. Maybe NTP, I forget who they work for, but maybe NTP is going to change the final report, you know. And so the trial was delayed even further. And then the final report comes out. And the trial came out, and I listened to a lot of this. It was all available. You couldn't record it. It's not legal to record federal trials, but you could listen to it. And it was just fascinating. All these witnesses and these EPA shills. I don't know what else to call them. These are guns for hire. We're going to say what you want, that this chemical's fine. And they tried to poke holes in these studies, but it wasn't very convincing to me. And I don't think Judge Chen was convinced by EPA's argument. So in his ruling, um, just excuse me, here, uh, in the ruling, here's what he said that it just came out on the 25th. There's Judge Chen. I like this guy from the beginning because he wasn't putting up with any EPA BS. Believe me, he was very frustrated with them. They were always trying to delay. And they basically said, look, we don't want to regulate fluoride. We just don't want to do this. That's what their attorney said, And he said, well, I'm the one who decides the outcome of this trial, and you'll have to take whatever action you can, but it's up to me to decide. I just want to hear the evidence. 75 years. The court finds that fluoridation of water at zero point 0.7 milligrams per liter, the level presently considered optimal in the United States, poses an unreasonable risk of reduced IQ in children. The court finds there's an unreasonable risk of such injury or risk sufficient to require the EPA to engage a regulatory response. Isn't this great, folks? I really feel good about this. Okay, I'm in favor of the science. I don't have like some agenda here. I don't think extra chemicals, man-made chemicals, are necessarily good for you. There's so many that have been produced, thousands out there that haven't been tested adequately, and we know what the effects of lead were. And now these forever chemicals, these PFOAs, you've heard about these, that were used in flame retardants and water repellents and things. Fluoride based chemicals, that's why that's the F in there, PFOA. I read about this in Science. Okay, so those never degrade. They get into your body. They find them up in the Arctic. in the water, in fish. I mean, what are we doing to ourselves with all these untested chemicals? And what kind of damage are we doing to our populations and to animals? In this case, the judge made the right decision. I've looked at all the evidence about fluoride. There's an unreasonable risk. Yes, is there a gray area where you really don't know at some of the lower doses? Yes, that's the nature of uncertainty as doses get smaller and smaller. But that doesn't mean it's a reasonable risk. It's called the precaution principle. And if you can show that the higher dose has a linear relationship, it's reasonable to assume there's still a linear relationship at a lower dose. And so what Judge Chen said is one thing the EPA cannot do now, however, in the face of this court's finding, is to ignore that risk. Now, EPA can appeal and so forth, which they'll probably do. But the next court that looks at this has to find an error. They have to find that Judge Chen made an error. That'd be very difficult. The pooled benchmark dose analysis concluded that a 1 point drop in IQ of a child is expected for each 0.28 milligrams per liter of fluoride in a pregnant mother's urine. It's highly concerning because maternal urinary fluoride levels for pregnant mothers in the US range from 0.8 milligrams a liter at the median, so half above the median, half below, uh, 1 to 1.89 milligrams per liter, depending on the degree of exposure. So this is drops of several points in IQ. It, it that's not acceptable. Well, well, who? What gives municipalities the right to lower your child's IQ? That's criminal. It's criminal. Not only is there insufficient. This is the main point that Michael Conant made. There has to be a margin of safety for a toxic substance. And what is the standard that EPA uses? And it's standard in the toxicology literature. You take 10% of what the lethal dose is, the minimum lethal dose, and you go back to 10% of that as a margin of safety for people that are especially sensitive, right? People that are especially sensitive to a chemical, you want to scale it back to 1/10, just as a margin of safety. You can see that right here. EPA's default margin of error requires a factor of 10 between the hazard level and the exposure level due to variability in human sensitivities. And folks, that's what's been the issue with fluoride the whole time. There are certain people, maybe they're not affected by it, but everyone's different. And you don't know how much water people are drinking. You can't control the dose. This is the only chemical that's ever been applied to the human population where you don't control the dose. That's not scientific because there could be people who maybe only have one kidney, people with kidney disease who are more sensitive to this, and people that maybe are having a higher reaction. So that's what they're saying here. There has to be a of margin of error here, right? And there's no margin of error. Uh, this uh, Even for pregnant women, uh, the safe level is considered zero point 0.4 milligrams a liter, and the optimal dose now is double that in our water supply. Uh, so, um, you could say that 4 parts per million's where it gets really dangerous. So that means you'd want zero point 0.4 milligrams a liter as your margin of safety using the 10 factor hazard level. So the judge did the right thing here, folks. I think we can be happy about this and realize the law works sometimes. And was an objective person, and he was not swayed by EPA. And you can read this for yourself on fluoridealert.org, the judge's ruling here. The scientific literature in the record provides a high degree of certainty that a hazard of fluoride is present. Fluoride is associated with reduced IQ. There are uncertainties presented by the underlying data regarding the appropriate point of departure, exposure levels. But those uncertainties do not undermine the finding of unreasonable risk. You see what the argument is here? Even if we do have uncertainties at lower exposure levels, it doesn't mean that there's not an unreasonable risk because people can drink a lot more and you're not controlling the dose. And that's unreasonable risk. In every scenario utilizing any of the various possible points of departures, exposure levels and metrics A risk is present in view of the applicable uncertainty factors that apply. Um, so here you can read the rest of this on your own. But approximately 2 million pregnant women, over 300,000 exclusively formula fed babies are exposed to fluoridated water. You're exposing babies to fluoridated water in baby formula. You see what the problem is here? I think even in New Hampshire, or was it Vermont, they required the water municipalities to say, don't use this water for baby formula because it exceeds what's considered to be healthy for infants. Just coming out of your tap. Um, the number of pregnant women and formula fed babies alone who are exposed to water fluoridation each year exceeds entire populations exposed to conditions of use for which EPA has found that's it, unreasonable risk. The EPA has found risk unreasonable where the population impacted was less than 500 people. So even if you could show that there's a chemical out there that impacts less than 500 people in the entire United States, EPA has taken action before and called it unreasonable risk. And here you have 2 million pregnant women, 2 million or more babies being affected. Well, anyway, guys, I think you get the point here, right? So, I think let's look at some of your comments. Will anything real come of it? Andy, something has already come of it. According to what I read on Twitter X from fluoridealert.org, um, I had it up before. There are municipalities that have already said they're shutting off their fluoride immediately based on this ruling. There was one I remember in New York and a couple across the United States that have already said we're terminating fluoride immediately until some uh, uh, process is found by which we can use it safely, if at all. Um, right. But in this case, Andy, just reading your last comment, the people won in this case. This was a lawsuit filed by citizens groups, Fluoride Action Network, and a variety of groups representing pregnant women against a very heavily funded agency, EPA, started by President Nixon, if you'll remember, back in 72. And uh, and EPA had all the resources available to them, just unlimited funding pretty much. And I listened to their attorneys while the trial was going on, day after day. They were just, they didn't really have the morale that our side had. You could just see it. They're doing their job, and I don't even think they were convinced by their own arguments if you looked at their faces. So, Andy, what comes out of this? Anything could come out of this, but it's a change. Whatever comes out of this is good. The if you looked at the news headlines today, there's a possibility fluoride just might end water fluoridation. That's one possible outcome here. It's now up to EPA to say how they're going to limit dosage to pregnant moms and to vulnerable people, and to ensure that the amount of fluoride in our water is safe. They have to come up. The ball's in their court now. You know what they were doing for all these years? That we just don't want to deal with it, and we're not going to make a change. We don't have to regulate it. It's not toxic. Now the court has shown fluoride is toxic. They have to regulate it like lead, like BPA. Remember bisphenol A? Do you remember all those arguments? Oh, there's nothing. It's such a small dosage. It's tiny. Well, it's a gender bender, BPA, estrogen mimicker, found to be carcinogenic, causes cells to grow like estrogen does. And BPA is now regulated. And phthalates and many other chemicals. You look at, Andy, do you look at those products you buy and it says state of California has determined that there's carcinogenic chemicals in what you're about to buy? And it contains phthalates. Well, at least the state of California got a law that if you sell it there, you have to say what's in it, phthalates and all these other gender benders and things like this. So, Andy, we don't know exactly what's going to come out of this, but there are a range of possibilities, but all of them are better than where we're at now. The easiest thing might be for municipalities just to say we're not gonna do it anymore. We're gonna just encourage people to buy fluoridated toothpaste. We're gonna hand out toothpaste to lower income people so they brush more. I mean, the best way to prevent cavities is dental cleanliness, brushing, flossing, regular dental exams. That's the way to deal with this. Healthier diets. And so EPA will have to come up with some plan where they inform you of the risks and they have to make the water safe. We'll see how they do this. Maybe they'll switch to a program where they fund toothpaste, handing out toothpaste in lower income neighborhoods. We'll see. But a lot of things could come out of this. And I imagine more municipalities across the country, these I went to some of these water meetings in Boulder, folks, around the time of this initiative. And, these people get elected, these managers, and they're appointed. And if now they could be considered vulnerable to putting a toxic chemical in your cities or town's water supply. So they don't want that on their record and they want to be reappointed or reelected or whatever. So I think it puts pressure back on the fluoride proponents now that the court has said it's toxic to show how can you use this in a safe way, if at all. And again, one extreme is you can't. It's just toxic at any level, unsafe at any speed. That could be one outcome here. Um, uh, it just totally strengthens our side to say this is dangerous. It's toxic. Federal court, highest federal court has said it's toxic, like lead was. No surprise. We knew about it. Cigarettes too. Remember all this time the industry said, "Well, it's not the smoke that cigarettes don't cause cancer. It's the smoke coming in contact with your lungs. You don't have to inhale that sort of thing. It can take a while, but um, it's just like cigarettes used to be much more widely available and people were smoking everywhere. And what do we have now? Well, you can be on a plane without cigarettes now. There's smoking sections. Large areas are blocked off from smoking if you don't like being around cigarette smoke. So, uh, yeah, lower carbs, less sugar. You know who one of the supporters of water fluoridation is? The biggest supporters, Andy. Uh, it's sugar industry. So it's the sugar industry because it's like a whitewash for them. White sugar, and then they can say, well, this is how you prevent it. They're the cause of cavities. It's sugar. So I don't want to go too far in promoting health advice or anything here on this particular platform. But look, we've gone through an hour here. Thanks for listening. I think we had a very good ruling here. It's something I followed since 2020. I had a good feeling about it, and I feel that the legal system did its job and struck back against EPA and Department of Justice. Department of Justice was backing EPA on this. So it shows courts can be independent, reach their own decisions, and maybe in a year or two or sooner, you'll be in a municipality that decides just to shut. Water. One more thing here: water fluoridation is expensive. It costs millions of dollars a year to add those chemicals safely to water. I mean, safely. You don't want to overdose the water with fluoride. There are cases you've heard about where the fluoride system breaks and it dumps a whole bunch of fluoride in the water, and people go to the hospital. This has happened in many places where the fluoride dispensing equipment breaks. It's supposed to be 1 part per million, a little drop here, drop there, and it breaks and it floods it with fluoride. So we'll have to see what happens here. But this is, to me, what could happen with UFO disclosure. Just to go back to this topic, which is what we talk about more on this channel, is a court could decide something like this. Uh, Senate, Congress could pass a law requiring witnesses to come forward, giving them immunity, giving them uh, giving them uh, ability to testify, to break their NDAs. You see? So this is the power of law, and this is what we appreciate by living in a society based on law, is it can make the right decision even against powerful interests. And so it shows we don't have to be afraid of these government agencies. We can litigate against them. And Michael Conant, by the way, just did a fantastic job. It was a total pleasure to listen to him going up against these EPA attorneys. I mean, he was just a bulldog. He never backed down. He just kept going at them. And if you've ever been in a court or listened to court hearings and so forth, I mean, it's you don't always get what you want. No side, both sides don't always get what they want, and the judge can slap him down. But he just never quit. He just kept coming back. He kept coming back, and he kept pointing out their burden of proof was on EPA to show that this was safe, and they couldn't show that it was safe. All the evidence showed that there's a linear correlation between amount of fluoride you consume and in utero and children's IQ, babies' IQ, children's IQ. And it just is completely unconscionable to add anything to water that would lower anyone's IQ when you can get the same effect, as Andy's saying here, by lowering sugar content, lowering carbs, brushing more, having better dental care. There's these easier ways to keep your teeth healthy than just drinking a chemical substance that has, for 100 years has been known to be one of the most toxic substances on the planet. So I'm feeling good about this. Any comments before we go? Thanks again for listening, and we'll be back with more of your favorite topics really soon. But this is a good moment. I just feel, after putting decades of work into this and reading about it. Again, the book is Fluoride Deception by Christopher Bryson, which goes into the whole history. It's just a lot of fun. Again, folks, there's a lot of parallels to other topics that are hidden by the government. UFOs, UFO crash retrievals, biologics, the stuff that David Grush talked about. I mean, this matters, and we can make progress. If we're persistent enough, we win in the end. And we are going to win with fluoride here by reducing our exposure to it. And personally, when I travel throughout the U.S., I drive sometimes. I stop in the towns that don't fluoridate. Billings, Montana, Sheridan, Wyoming. I know these places because I've been following who fluoridates and who doesn't. And I stop in the towns that don't fluoridate. I feel better about drinking the water. Otherwise, you got to use one of these water filters, like Zero Water is one. You can buy that like at Target or something. That takes fluoride out, but not all water filters do. The more expensive ones do. And based on what I know about fluoride, I want as little as possible in my drinking water supply. My teeth are very healthy, and I don't need water fluoridation to keep my teeth healthy. Just brush them, floss them, whatever you guys like. Use a water pick. There's just a lot of ways to it. Delta, nice to see you again. Um, with the right people in power to uphold laws, yes. Right. A society with too many laws, it can go the wrong way too, with too many laws. So, but we do want laws that we do want. I mean, the purpose of the government in a liberal democracy like we live in is like the night watchman, like to keep us safe from things that we cannot see ourselves, that we cannot regulate. And their job is to regulate dangerous chemicals, our exposure to cancer causing chemicals. That's part of what government's job is to provide safety. And they have to do, that's what their mandate is. So this decision is in the right direction. If they want to promote dental health, nothing wrong with that. You got to find a safe way to do it without side effects. That's it. No neurotoxic effects. So anyway, uh, we'll see what happens here. And thanks, Andy. Uh, yes, thank you. Turquoise waving speech. So thanks again for listening, folks, and stay tuned. Stay informed. Again, the website, if you didn't see it, is this is where you can get your information. fluoridealert.org. And that has all the latest on this. And these are the people that sponsored the lawsuit against EPA. Okay, folks, thanks very much. We will see you in the ether. See you next time. Take care for now. Bye.